Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rimbach.
Call Center Coach develops and unites the next generation of call center leaders. Through our e-learning and community, individuals gain knowledge and skills in the 6 core competencies that is the blueprint that develops high-performing call center leaders. Successful supervisors do not just happen. So go to callcentercoach.com to learn more about enrollment and download your copy of the Supervisor Success Path ebook now. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I'm excited because I have somebody on the show today who's going to give us some insights into how we can actually make some better decisions, not falling back on our gut. Gleb Tsipursky was born in Chisinau, Moldova, a small country in Eastern Europe in 1981. It's famous for being one of the least happy countries in the world. Fortunately for him, he was 10. His parents took him and his little brother, who was born in 86, to New York City, and that's where they were raised. As a kid, his dad told him with utmost conviction and absolutely no reservation to go with your gut. He ended up making some really bad decisions. For instance, wasting several years pursuing a medical career. Gleb also watched his dad make some terrible choices that gravely harmed his family as his dad followed his gut, such as hiding some of his salary from his mom for several years. And after she discovered this and several other financial secrets he kept, her trust in him was broken, which was one of the major factors leading to their long separation. Fortunately, they eventually reconciled, but the lack of trust was never fully repaired. From that experience, Gleb started learning about the dangers of people following their gut reactions. His conviction that the omnipresent advice to follow your gut was hollow grew only stronger as he came of age during the dot-com bomb and the fraudulent accounting scandals of top executives of Enron, Tyco, WorldCom, which led to ruined reputations and long jail sentences. The best explanation for their seemingly irrational behavior comes from their willingness to follow their gut. As someone with an ethical code of utilitarianism, desiring the most good for the most number, Gleb felt a calling to reduce suffering and to improve well-being through addressing these problems. Therefore, he devoted himself to the mission of protecting people from the dangerous judgment errors known as cognitive biases, which devastate bottom lines and bring down high-flying careers. He focused on developing the most effective and profitable decision-making strategies based on pragmatic business experience and cutting-edge behavioral economics and cognitive neuroscience to empower leaders to avoid business disasters and maximize their bottom lines. Studying the topic formally, doing research in cognitive neuroscience and behavioral economics with over 15 years in academia, including 7 years as a professor in Ohio State University's Decision Sciences Collaborative, he shifted away from academia to devote his full-time efforts to business as the CEO of the boutique consulting, coaching, and training firm Disaster Avoidance Experts. Dr. Tsipursky's cutting-edge thought leadership has been featured in popular venues that include Fast Company, CBS News, Times, Scientific America, Psychology Today, The Conversation, Business Insider, Government Executive, and The Chronicle of Philanthropy and Inc. magazine. Gleb has conveyed all his experience to date in his book, Never Go With Your Gut: How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters. The legacy he hopes to leave is to empower leaders to notice and address the kind of dangerous judgment errors that decimate so many careers and businesses. He lives in and travels from Columbus, Ohio. In his free time, he enjoys tennis, hiking, and playing with his 2 cats. And most importantly, he makes sure to spend abundant quality time with his wife to avoid disasters in his personal life. Gleb Tsipursky, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
Absolutely. Very happy to do so, Jim.
Oh, I'm glad you're here. Now, I've given my legion a little bit about you, but can you share what your current passion is so that we can get to know you even better?
Sure. So right now, I'm really passionate about the topics that we've talked about, how to help leaders avoid decision disasters. And the reason I'm passionate about this, shared a little bit about this earlier, Jim, thank you for sharing that, is because of my background. I've seen so many leaders make terrible, terrible choices, and then their followers suffered so much, lost so much money, lost so much morale, and it's just devastating for me. I mean, I care a lot about people. My value set as utilitarian, so desiring the most good for the most number. And when I see people make unnecessary bad choices, it's just, heartbreaking for me. So that's why I'm passionate about doing what I do, helping leaders make much better decisions and avoid disasters.
Well, and I'm sure too, and I'm glad that you even shared the experience as far as your family was concerned, because, I always used to tell my mom that, she's a great role model. And a lot of times it's for things that I should not do.
Yeah, my dad's like that for me. Yep, exactly.
I mean, it's just the way that it is. We are a role model for our children. It's just the way that it goes. So, but when you start talking about, some of the common, they seem irrational, but yet they're common mistakes that people make. In the book, you start talking about different frameworks and decision-making models and questionnaires, and we're going to hit on some of these things. But the first thing you talk about is 5 questions that we need to ask in order to be able to avoid these decision disasters. Let's walk through those 5 questions real quick.
Sure. And just so folks know about the frameworks, my passion is solving problems. There are a lot of people who talk about, hey, here's how you're screwed up, and the points don't matter, right? Here's how our brain is screwed up. There's a lot of work out there for that. My book and my work this book is the first one. It actually focuses on business leadership and helps leaders actually solve these problems. And the 5 questions that Jim mentioned is a solution, one of the primary solutions to these problems. It's something that you take just less than 5 minutes to ask yourself before any decision that you don't want to screw up, any daily decision. We have more major decisions, there's a more intense technique, but this is for daily decisions, writing emails, having meetings, making decisions on investments that don't matter super much, but are still serious. You don't want to screw them up. So, first question, what important information did I not yet fully consider? Again, what important information did I not yet fully consider? Now, you want to look at information that's only important, so decide what's important. You don't want to get stuck in analysis paralysis looking at all the irrelevant stuff. Now, you also want to look at information that you didn't consider. That's the other component of this question. And what we typically don't consider is information that goes against what's comfortable for us, and information that goes against our gut reactions. Now, as you can tell from the title, Never Go With Your Gut, I talk a lot about how we should not simply go with our gut. We should check with our head. And that's because our gut leads us to making some really bad choices because we mistake the feeling of comfort when we're comfortable with for the feeling of what's true and what's right for us and our careers and our businesses. So you want to look at information that you didn't consider that goes against your intuitions. So that's the first question. Second, what dangerous judgment errors have we not yet considered? And these are cognitive biases. And cognitive biases are the typical mistakes we as human beings make because of how our brain is wired, which we'll talk about later in the show. And I talk about the 30 most common dangerous judgment errors in the book, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters. Third, what would a trusted and objective advisor tell you to do? So imagine a little Jim on your shoulder. What would he tell you to do as you're making your decisions? Think about that image, or another trusted and objective advisor. Now, those first 3 questions are about actually making the decision. The last 2 questions are about implementing the decision. So the first of those, or the 4th question on the questionnaire, is how have I considered all the ways this could fail? Now, one of the typical cognitive biases we run into is called the planning fallacy, where we make plans that are based on the assumptions that everything will go fine. That's our intuitions. We are very comfortable with that assumption that everything will go well. But how often have your plans survived contact with the enemy? The way to address that in advance is to think about all the ways that your plan can fail, address all the problems that you can in advance by preventing them, addressing them, and also building in more resources for things you can't anticipate. So that's the 4th one. And finally, what would cause me to revisit, what new information would cause me to revisit this decision? You want to really think about this in advance before you're actually in the heat of the moment and implementing the decision. Because when you're implementing the decision, you're committed to the decision, you're much more likely to follow through with whatever plan you made, even when you shouldn't. We'll talk later about some judgment errors that we make when we should not follow through with a decision. So you want to decide in advance what could cause you to revisit the decision, especially if it's part of a team decision-making process, because there are always going to be some people who may not agree with the decision, and then you don't want to run into the situation where they'll say, oh, I told you so, we should change our minds. You want to agree as a group what would cause you to revisit the decision, and then revisit it only if that situation arises. So those are the 5 simple, clear questions you can ask. Take less than 5 minutes to do so. And if one of the answers doesn't make you happy and it takes more than 5 minutes, believe me, it'll be very much worth it to explore it in more depth from the perspective of not losing time and money down the road.
And as you're talking, Gleb, I start thinking about, say an artisan or a mechanic. It's, using the right tool, for the problem that's in front of them. And the fact is that we're using tools all day long. It's whether or not we're using, using the right tool and then using that tool correctly. And so your book, gives us a lot of these frameworks, including the questionnaire that you talk about that we're going to go over, in order to help people to make sure that they are pulling the right thing at the right time and using it in the right way. And one of the things that you have is the 8-step decision-making model. And because you even mentioned it, you're like, okay, well, everybody has some model they use. It's whether or not you have one that works well, and that you know how to use it. So go through the 8-step decision-making model so that we can hopefully make better decisions.
Sure. So this is a model, unlike the questionnaire, which you should ask for daily decision-making, for all the little things that you don't want to screw up in your daily life. This 8-step decision-making model is for more significant decisions. And Jim's right. We all have some kind of intuitive decision-making model in our head, but the vast majority of us haven't written it out. We don't have a formal process. I mean, the best we do is a pro-con list, and there's many reasons for why pro-con list doesn't work, which we can talk about if that comes up. But there's a lot of things that don't work. And only recently have we been discovering, using cognitive neuroscience and behavioral economics, what is called evidence-based business. Now, evidence-based medicine has actually risen up in the last couple of decades. We've really been making a lot of mistakes in medicine because we haven't been testing it. We haven't been testing what's actually working and what's not. Now we're testing what's working in business and what's not. And this is a decision-making model that has been shown to work effectively as opposed to the large majority of models, intuitive models that don't. So the first step, you identify the need for a decision to be made. Now that seems simple, what's the need, right? Well, unfortunately, we as human beings tend to go along way too often not making a decision when we really should make a decision. It feels often uncomfortable to make a decision. We much prefer to leave it in the hands of other people. Let somebody else make the decision, not me. I shouldn't be the responsible one. Let somebody else go ahead and take the responsibility. Well, I mean, if you don't take responsibility, who will, right? The responsibility may never be taken, and then the whole situation will be quite problematic if you don't identify the need for decision to be made. So the first step is scan your environment pretty constantly for the need for decision to be made. Is your environment shifting? Is the situation becoming more problematic in some way? And then what kind of decision do you want to make? So that's the risk. Also, opportunity. Are there opportunities that you may be missing because you're not making decisions? So scan your environment for opportunities as well. That's first. Then gather relevant information from a variety of perspectives. A variety is critical here. We tend to, when we gather information, ask only the people who agree with us already. And we go to them because we'll feel good about them. Our gut intuitions, our gut will feel good about the responses. It's the yes men and women. You don't want to only hear these people. You want to go to people who hold perspectives contrary to your decision, to your perspective, and get their ideas. You don't need to follow them, but you need to hear them out. So that's really important. Then you want to decide on the goals. That's the third step. Paint a clear vision of the outcome. So often we go ahead with a decision not knowing what the actual goal should be. We don't have a clear vision of what we want to reach. We just think, we should, make a decision. Like, let's say, we should make a new car model, and we don't think about what is the goal, what is the outcome of a car model we want to make. Or we should launch a new product, and we don't think about the goal, the outcome of this new product. So these are serious problems that people tend to run into. Then develop clear decision-making criteria to evaluate the options of the decisions that you're choosing. And that's a big problem. People often look at the options. I have these 5 options. Whereas really what you should start with is develop the criteria before you look at the options. Because if you look at the options in advance, you will have prejudiced yourself and you will intuitively tend to prefer one of the options and you won't think about the right criteria. So if you're hiring somebody, decide, is the salary that they are requesting the most important thing? Or is their fit for the job the most important thing? Or are their technical skills the most important thing? And how would you weigh these 3? So that's another example. Then generate viable options to achieve your goals. So that's the options that we're talking about. So look at all the options. Now, a mistake that extensive research has shown is that we don't generate nearly enough options for important decisions. Leaders tend to make fast decisions, and that's a big problem. We're in the Fast Leader podcast. Leaders tend to make decisions way too quickly because they settle on the first option that comes along that seems good enough, and they don't maximize. They can take 15 more minutes, half an hour, and get a decision that will be 50% more good. That's so often the case, and they make the mistake of not taking the time to make a wise decision.
Hey, that's a great segue. Hold on, I got to stop right there, Gleb, because
sure,
that's exactly why we call it the Fast Leader Show, so that we can learn these systems and frameworks, because that ultimately, in the long run, from the long-term view, we do actually just, from a velocity perspective, we go significantly faster. Because if we don't do these things correctly, as I'm sure you deal with every single day, people just are doing the same thing over and over. It's just insane decision-making process. And do you think you're moving faster? Fast leader. You're a boat anchor and you're weighing everyone down. So I appreciate you setting me up for that.
Sure. Happy to do so, Jim. I was wondering if you'd comment on that. It was a little bit provocative, right? But in my experience, it's not that people tend to go faster when they make these decisions. It's that they tend to not go into the ditch. Because, that's when you really are going to be in trouble and really not going anywhere fast. Right. So that's the 5th one. Next, weigh the options. So again, I told you earlier about thinking about which of these decision-making criteria is more important. The salary demand of someone, their fit for the job, their technical skills, whatever. Weigh the criteria according to the options that you have available. Next, implement the option that you chose. And finally, evaluate the implementation process. You don't want to just say, okay, I'm implementing, that's great, we're finished. You want to measure. You want to measure how well the decision is doing so that you're able to revise it as needed in the process. So that's a really important last step that people often tend to miss, and they should not miss. So that's the 8-step process for significant major decisions.
And the reason we have to have that, and you've kind of hit it on it here and there, is you talking about biases and things associated with that. You're studying through behavioral economics and neuroscience and all of these other things, brain, all the brain activity and thing that we've learned about just within the past couple of years, and why all this occurs. So if you can just kind of hit on some of those core major biases that oftentimes are being used on us and upon us, and we're being victimized to, that we're just not aware of.
Sure. So we have a lot of cognitive biases so several of them we already talked about in the program. One is the planning fallacy that I mentioned, that we tend to assume everything will go according to plan. Now, the planning fallacy comes up most often when people think, planning to fail, failing to plan is planning to fail. So people think that I need to make a plan because otherwise I'm going to fail. Unfortunately, that's often a bad idea. And here's why. We tend to make plans as though they will come true. We tend to plan for the best case outcomes. And that is going to be a problem when we invest our resources and make a commitment based on these plans. In reality, we don't tend to plan for all the problems that will come along. There will be many problems that come that will screw up your plans. Plans never survive contact with the enemy, but we tend to make plans as though they do. So much better strategy is thinking to yourself, failing to plan for problems is planning to fail. So again, failing to plan for problems is planning to fail. That's a much better way of thinking about this, planning fallacy. Another one that I like to talk to folks about is the illusion of transparency. And this is especially relevant since we're talking here in a podcast and you're kind of listening to me. The illusion of transparency is the illusion that we are communicating much more effectively than we actually are communicating. We tend to think that whatever we say, whatever we convey, the other person understands 100% accurately and 100% effectively, and we don't tend to check for their understandings. Now, when I'm doing a presentation, I do a lot of training as consulting and coaching. What I do is I make sure to check that the audience is actually understanding what I'm saying. Are they actually getting the information? I'm not just lecturing at them. I'm having a two-way communication. Can't do it on a podcast, unfortunately, but this is something that you need to think about when you're communicating with others. Are you falling for the illusion of transparency when you're thinking that whatever you're saying is being 100% understood by the other party? Another one that I plugs into the illusion of transparency, the planning fallacy, and so many others is called the overconfidence bias. Now, that's what it sounds like. We as human beings tend to be much more confident that we are accurate and we're correct than we actually are. It's especially a big problem for leaders. Leaders tend to be more overconfident than most people. And so I'll give you an interesting example. When studies have shown that when people say they're 100% confident about something, that they bet the house on it, they're actually right about 80% of the time. Now think about this. If you have to make a bet the company move, you're very confident that this is going to be right. If you're making a bet your career move, you're only likely to be right 80% of the time. 80% of the time. No wonder that so many companies go bankrupt in a surprising manner. So many people, their careers are brought down in a surprising manner because of these sorts of problems. So those are just 3 out of the 30 dangerous judgment errors that I talk about in my book. And I can talk about more, but I'll stop there and let Jim have a chance.
Well, that's why we have to get the book, right? I mean, 30. Well, what you do is you talk about 12 techniques that you can actually use in order to be able to address these dangerous judgment errors. So if we could, maybe we should just run through those.
Sure, happy to talk about them. And like I said, a lot of folks talk about what are the dangerous judgment errors. My focus is on how you actually can address them, can fix them. And so the techniques I'll go through in full as opposed to the 30 most dangerous judgment errors, which you can check out in my book. So the first one, you want, and just to be very clear about what these are mental habits that you can develop. Unlike the questionnaire or the 8-step decision-making model, the questionnaire for casual everyday decisions, the 8-step model for major significant ones, these are mental habits that you develop and integrate into yourself. It takes a while to learn to develop these mental habits, as it takes a long time to develop any mental habits. I mean, remember when you learned to drive a car? It took a while to do that. Now you can do it on autopilot. It's automatic. It's comfortable for you. But it took a while to learn how to do that. And the same thing applies to the mental habits that I'll talk about right now. First, you want to identify and make a plan to address dangerous judgment errors. So that involves identifying which dangerous judgment errors you as an individual are most prone to. I'll give an example about myself. I tend to be prone to the optimism bias. So the optimism bias is kind of what it sounds like. It's the tendency to be too optimistic. I tend to think that the grass is green on the other side of the hill and the glass is half full. My wife, on the other hand, is much more pessimistic. She suffers from the pessimism bias, unrealistically negative evaluation of the future. She thinks the glass is half empty and the grass is yellow on the other side of the hill. So we can, sometimes have tensions, but we can correct for each other's deficiencies. So you want to know which of the 30 most dangerous judgment errors you're most prone to and make a plan to address them. Second, delay your decision making. Before making any decision, you want to delay it to check with your head about your intuitive gut decision making. We tend to approach any decision with our gut. Now, research has shown that in our decision making, about 80 to 90% of our decision making is driven by our gut intuitions. So you want to step back from your gut intuition and check whether it's counting to 10 for very small casual decisions, asking the 5 questions for any daily decision you don't want to get wrong, or using the 8 steps for major decision making. Then mindfulness meditation. Now you might be surprised by this, and I'm talking here very clearly, very specifically not about woo stuff, but about meditation, sitting down and doing breathing exercises. I talk about that in the book, and other meditation techniques that have been shown by research to be effective. Why is that important? Because it builds up your focus. And your focus is what you need to do. Your willpower is what you need to use to resist your gut intuitions and make wiser decisions. Then, make predictions about the future. Why is that important? Because we tend to be much more optimistic and confident about the quality of our decision making than we actually are. And you probably see other folks who around you who think that they're much better decision makers than they actually are. So how you can square the circle is when you look at your own decision making, make predictions about how well your decisions will turn out, and have other people with whom you collaborate make predictions about how well their decisions will turn out. And that way you can calibrate yourself and you can adjust yourself for more accurate decision making and help other people do so. Next, consider alternative explanations and options. So consider alternative explanations and options for various decisions that you want to go into. Now, you want to be careful, we tend to be very inclined to go with our intuitive, comfortable decision making, and we don't consider other ways we can go, other options for making choices, and other explanations for phenomena around us. If somebody, let's say, makes a remark that we see as offensive to us or is short-tempered with us, we tend to attribute hostile intent to this person, whereas really it's most likely someone who's being careless or unthoughtful. And you want to consider all of these alternative explanations for this remark. Another one is probabilistic thinking, ties into making predictions about the future. Probabilistic thinking is estimating the likelihoods of certain situations happening. How many percent is that likely? Now, this is very intuitive to us. We tend to be very black and white thinkers. We tend to think something either will happen or will not happen, or the other option that some people will say is maybe. Now, that's a very fuzzy option. Those are very fuzzy option sets. What about saying, this is 10% likely to happen, this is 30% likely to happen, this is 70% likely to happen? You want to be able to train yourself to make these evaluations, because then you can make much better decisions if you have those estimates in your head. Then, consider past experiences. This is a very good fix for the planning fallacy. I've worked with clients who tell me that, this project has taken, every time we have a situation where we make a bid on a project, we say it's 2 million, and then it takes us 3 million to do this. A manufacturing company in Pittsburgh, for example. That's what client who I worked with. And I asked them, well, if you know that in the past it has always taken you 1 million more, 50% more, why don't you bid more? Why don't you actually invest that amount of money, make a plan for that amount of money? And the guy was saying, not sure why. And that's one very effective way of addressing the planning fallacy and a number of other problems. Look what happened in the past and use that to inform the future. And then consider the long-term future, the repeating scenarios. We tend to be very short-term oriented as human beings. And that's a phenomenon related to cognitive bias called loss aversion. We want to not lose things. We want to, and we tend to think about losing things as a really bad thing. Whereas in reality, making short-term losses for much bigger long-term gains is a very effective strategy for the future. And we tend to fall for the danger of reaping short-term profits at the expense of much bigger long-term gains. Then consider other people's perspectives. So when you look at people and you say, for a team member, when I work with teams, and I ask them, how much have you contributed to, leadership team, the C-suite of a corporation, how much have you contributed to the overall success of the leadership team? How many percent would you say is your contribution? I don't remember the last time when the total sum, when everyone has added up their contribution, has been lower than 150%. So we have that really serious problem where people tend to overestimate their contributions. They tend to overestimate. It's very intuitive. It's very natural for us to be inwardly oriented. But if we don't think about other people's perspectives, we get into serious trouble down the road when we get into clashes and conflicts with them. Next, use an outside view to get an external perspective. So I mentioned about that. That's the number question 3. What would a trusted and objective advisor suggest you do? What would Jim suggest you do? Somebody who you trust, somebody who's an objective advisor. Then Point 11, mental habit 11, set a policy to guide your future self and your organization. This is going to be especially important once you have understood that our gut intuitions tend to cause us to make bad decisions. So something that I work with a lot of clients, I have them make sure to commit to using the 5 questions before making any medium term, any everyday decision, and the 8 questions, the 8-step model for major decisions. So they set a policy for themselves and for their organizations. And that helps them really address a lot of problems down the road when they make a commitment in the moment to making much better choices, process choices down the road. Finally, make a pre-commitment. That refers to making a public commitment that other people know about who are relevant to certain policies and certain decisions. That's especially helpful. I'll give you one example where that's helpful. That's really helpful when you want to change your internal culture of an organization to make it acceptable to criticize the leadership or pass negative information up the ranks. Otherwise you get into the problem of whistleblowers who don't want to share their information. I mean, that's a really big problem. It's a really big issue when negative information is not passed up the ranks, and then suddenly the company is in big, big trouble. Everybody knows about it except the leadership team. So you make a pre-commitment by saying, hey, we'll give praise, we'll give raises, we'll give promotions, whatever, to people who pass negative information up the ranks. And that's one way of making a pre-commitment. Another one can be, make a Facebook post telling all your friends, I will lose 20 pounds in the next 3 months, or I will, make a donation to this charity that I really hate. That's another way of making a pre-commitment in your personal life. So those are 12 mental habits that you can develop that would make it much easier for you to address the dangerous judgment errors that cause us so much trouble.
Hey, I think your last suggestion is a really good one.
There you go.
I'm going to do this. Otherwise, I'm going to donate to something I hate. Now, that's a good preventative maintenance tool. Okay. Yep. So I think what you went through right there, people could actually sit there and say, oh my gosh, this is daunting. The fact is that it's more daunting to make bad decisions and have to do things all over again. And then also, tarnish any type of, trust or credibility or, anything that's associated with that. And in all due respect, like you said, which is so important, is people need to, know that, okay, this is what I do for simple, shorter, types of decisions, midterm, types of decisions and all of that. But I think it's really important for everybody to know at all different levels of an organization that we need to have structure to our ability to decide better. Because if we do fall back on our intuition, and one thing I say is, you only know what's been put in. Mm-hmm. And in today's world of rapid, change and extensive, diversity and complexity, it's impossible. And you said it yourself. You can't know it all. Even if you gathered all the perspectives of all the people who work in your organization, regardless of the size of it, you still aren't going to know it all.
You're absolutely right.
So if I start thinking about, really where to start in all of this, mm-hmm. I need a starting point, because if, like I said, if not, I look at all this, I'll be like, this is just way too daunting, right?
Sure.
Where do I start, Gleb?
Well, I like to remind people of something that a lot of their mothers probably said, when you're angry, count to 10. And that's the essence of number 2, delaying decision making, Do you, when you're angry, count to 10, or do you just kind of mouth off and shoot off that rapid email? Now, just hopefully you do count to 10, like your mom said. Now, just apply that to all of your decisions. First, start by delaying decision making. Count to 10, and then use the 5 questions. That's a very, very easy start. That's a very easy way to get into it. So delay decision making by 10 seconds, and that should give you time to check with your head as opposed to going with your gut. And for any decision that you don't want to screw up in your daily life, there's some decisions that don't matter. Where do you go to get your sushi? Probably not that bad unless there's a disreputable place and you have sickness, then you don't want to do that. But any reputable place, you should be okay. But if you want to make a more serious decision, how do you write a complex email to your supervisor about a problem that's happening? That's definitely where you want to use the 5 questions. So what I have all my clients have the 5 questions sitting in front of them on this handout, on the decision aid handout. And that's very easy. They have it all the time in front of them. So that's a very, very easy way to get into the process. Just use those 5 questions to make any daily decision. And after that, if you find them useful, which I can pretty much guarantee you will, you can start doing the more complex things like the 8 steps or the 12 mental habits. So that's what I advise people to do.
Well, that's very helpful. Okay, so, and it's funny that you said that. I mean, I think just about growing up almost every day, my mother's response to anything I brought to her was, okay, count to 10, Sharon. Okay, so when I start thinking about all this, we need tools, we need frameworks, we need inspiration. And one of the things that we look for on the show are quotes to help inspire us. Is there a quote or two that you like that you can share?
So something that I mentioned, I like to challenge quotes, but the quote that I really like that is from Ben Franklin is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So that's probably the most powerful quote that I like. The ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's something that we don't think about nearly enough, but an ounce of preventing disaster is worth a pound of cure. So that's one quote I like to tell people you should go with it. The quotes that I challenge is go with your gut, which you shouldn't do. That's a powerful quote. Many people say you shouldn't do it. Another one that I challenge and that you already know about is failing to plan is planning to fail. I challenge that. Failing to plan for problems is planning to fail. So those are things that people should think about. Those are quotes I challenge, but the first quote I fully support.
And I thank you for sharing all of those. Okay, so there are times, however, where we haven't done a good job following these frameworks and done all that. We've made mistakes and we learned from them, hopefully, and then next time when we approach them, we don't fall into some of those biases, right? So we talk about getting over the hump on the show because there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from that, so that hopefully we make the corrections going forward. But we need people to share those stories. Is there a time where you've gotten over the hump that you can share?
So one of the biggest challenges I've had was a situation about 5 years ago, when in 2014, and I've been married to my wife since 2003 by that time. But that 11 years after our marriage was probably the most challenging period in our marriage yet. We had many more conflicts, many more stresses than we ever had before. And that was because I was doing my separate consulting, she was doing her separate consulting. At that point, we decided to create a nonprofit organization devoted to popularizing the research on cognitive neuroscience and behavioral economics and decision-making called Intentional Insights. And what we learned and what we were doing, we were creating this organization, planning it out, and I was coming up with all of these ideas about, hey, this is great, this is going to be great. And she was like, no, that's not going to work. What are you talking about? No, that's a bad idea. And so we had a lot of conflicts, a lot of tensions, a lot of stresses. And as we talked things out, we kind of eventually went on a higher level of like, how do we collaborate together? Why is this happening? That's when we discovered that I'm an optimist. I tend to see the grass is green on the other side of the hill, and she's a pessimist. She tends to see the grass as yellow on the other side of the hill. So that was a big problem and a big revelation. We haven't really thought about that before because we never collaborated on any serious matter before. I had my own work, she had her own work, right? So what we figured out that really helped me with team leadership later onward and team coaching later onward was that there is a much more effective way for optimists like myself to collaborate with pessimists like her. I take the step of creating the ideas. So here are 20 ideas that I generate, la, 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 la. And she sees them and I pass them on to her as half-baked ideas. And then she chooses, a couple of those ideas and says, okay, all of the rest of the ideas, let's put them aside. These 2 ideas, they're maybe worth finishing baking. And then she improves them and goes on to kind of perfecting them. And that's her strength. She's very bad at generating ideas. She's much better than me at perfecting them and getting them into good shape. And so that's when we really got over the hump, once we learned this method of collaborating together and we were able to really flow at that point. Because I was generating ideas, she was improving them, generating, improving. And so that really helped us work together going forward. And that's how 2 years ago, when we created Disaster Avoidance Experts, we combined her consulting business, nonprofits, and my consulting business and businesses together to work on a joint consulting, coaching, and training firm. It would have never been possible if we hadn't discovered that about ourselves and learned how to collaborate better going forward.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I mean, because even that, you started talking about, the different viewpoints and the different perspectives, but still moving beyond that and doing the collaboration component, because I think so many times people just stop there. It's like, hey, there's too much work that needs to be done. But the reality is, if you can actually get through that work, the outcome is significantly greater, because the synergies, it's the typical 1 + 1 actually equaling 3 type.
Absolutely. It totally is.
When I start thinking, though, I mean, you and I had a discussion prior to even recording. When I looked at this book, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much information and insight and depth to all these things. I said, Gleb, well, the way I look at this, you actually have created the foundation for your next 6 volumes. I mean, because you can easily split all this out and go into greater depth. But, so when I start looking at that and, talking about, you were in academia, you're now in the private sector, having your own business and doing consulting, I started thinking about some of the goals that you have. So with all this that you're doing, what's one of your goals?
Well, my personal passion is to really seriously change the way that people think about decision-making. For leaders everywhere to be aware that their decision-making, intuitive decision-making process is far from perfect, let's say it euphemistically, and then use effective strategic techniques to address their decision-making problems. So my goal is for my work to make a really large contribution to this sphere. And you're right, this is a first book, it's a framework book, and I hope to write many more books. This book really talks about the problems and solving them in an overarching 30,000-foot perspective. My next books plan to dive deep into various specific aspects of decision-making and how we can improve them. So I hope to have a career writing about this, talking about this, consulting and coaching about this, where I can really make a significant difference to reducing suffering in the world through improving leadership decision-making.
And the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best. Now, before we move on, let's get a quick word from our sponsor. An Even Better Place to Work is an easy-to-use solution that gives you a continuous diagnostic on employee engagement, along with integrated activities that will improve employee engagement and leadership skills in everyone. Using this award-winning solution is guaranteed to create motivated, productive, and loyal employees who have great work relationships with their colleagues and your customers. To learn more about An Even Better Place to Work, visit beyondmorale.com/better. All right, here we go, Fast Leader Legion. It's time for the Hump Day Hoedown. Okay, Gleb, the Hump Day Hoedown is the part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions, and your job is to give us robust, yet rapid responses that are going to help us move onward and upward faster. Gleb Tsipursky, are you ready to hoe down?
I'll do my best.
All right. What is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
I think what's holding me back is my desire to do things a little bit better than they should be done. I'm a little bit too much of a perfectionist, and I'm trying to work on that, but that's difficult for me.
What is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
Well, the best leadership advice actually was when I was learning about the decision-making, and for me, the advice to not trust my gut feelings, that the feeling of comfort is not necessarily at all the feeling that is right, what is true, what is right, what is best. That was incredibly helpful advice that I got from my mentor at graduate school when I was learning about the kind of screwed up brain that we have.
And what is one of your secrets that you believe contributes to your success?
I think one of my biggest secrets is my ability to effectively collaborate with others. Now, the way I do that, my secret to doing that, is to always think about myself as the adult in the room. So think of myself as the adult in the room. That means that, if the other person is behaving in a problematic way, I should not stoop to their level. I'm always going to be kind of emotionally mature and see what's driving them to engage in this problematic behavior and try to accommodate them in a way that still enables me to achieve my goals.
And what do you feel is one of your best tools that helps you lead in business or life?
I think one of my best tools is my ability to take effective breaks from work occasionally. I used to be a person who worked very long stretches of periods of time, and I eventually had burnout at a certain point. I had to really take a lot of time back. Now I learned how to have much better work-life balance and taking appropriate periods of breaks after doing long periods of work. That has really helped me succeed going forward.
And what is one book that you'd recommend to our Legion? And it could be from any genre. Of course, we're going to put a link to Never Go With Your Gut on your show notes page as well.
One of the really good books in the topics that I talk about is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. So he's one of the forerunners who actually discovered all the ways that our brain is screwed up. And he wrote a really interesting and complex book about these topics that goes in depth into each of these cognitive biases. So for people who want to learn more about the topics that I talk about, and specifically about all the ways that our brain is screwed up, great book.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, you can find links to that and other bonus information from today's show by going to fastleader.net/Gleb Tsipursky. Okay, and Tsipursky is actually spelled Tsipursky. Okay, Gleb, this is my last hump day hold on question. Imagine you were given the opportunity to go back to the age of 25, and you can take the knowledge and skills that you have now back with you, but you can't take it all. You can only choose one. So what skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you, and why?
The thing that I would take back is emotional awareness. I'm much more emotionally aware, much more in touch with my emotions. And this might sound woo, but it's really not, because emotions, as I mentioned before, drive 80 to 90% of our decision making. And there were a lot of dumb decisions I made when I was 25 and older that came from me not being aware of how my emotions were driving me to make poor decisions. So being much more emotionally aware of my emotions and what's causing me to make decisions would have been so helpful when I was 25.
Gleb, I've had fun with you today. How can the Fast Leader Legion connect with you?
They can check out my book, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any bookstore around you. So props to indie bookstores especially. They can check out my website, disasteravoidanceexperts.com. Again, that's disasteravoidanceexperts.com, and sign up for my Wise Decision Maker Guide list of resources there. disasteravoidanceexperts.com/WDMG. And they can always email me if they want to answer any questions about anything they heard about in the podcast. That's Gleb, Gleb, at disasteravoidanceexperts.com. Happy to answer any questions.
Gleb Tsipursky, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. The Fast Leader Legion honors you and thanks you for helping us get over the hump. Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.